233.
I'm sorry, Kathy, what number did you say?
233.
We're live
Thank
now.
you.
Great. It looks like we're live.
Everybody's live.
We are live and streaming. Is that correct?
That is correct. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Apologize for the delay. We'd like to welcome our audience. I would like to let you know as we get started, again, I do apologize for the delay in getting the live streaming started. I would like to let you know that the way this meeting is taking place, as has been the case in the past, the board members are participating via Zoom from a distance.
Go live.
The administration is participating via Zoom, but they are together socially distanced in a conference room. This will be a test to see how we might begin to think about in-person meetings as we move forward in that direction. But at this moment, all board members are participating from their homes at a distance. This is a special meeting of the Loveland Board of Education. I'd like to call it to order at 6:08 p.m. and ask our treasurer, Mr. Hawley, for a roll call.
Mr. Doherty,
Here.
Dr. Lorenz,
Here.
Ms. Pettit,
Here.
Dr. Swetchenow,
Here.
Mrs. Washburn.
Here.
The first item on the agenda is to adopt the agenda for the meeting. So we would need a motion. You see the agenda on board docs. It includes 3 discussion type topics as proposed for this special meeting. And then just a couple of items related to those special topics. So is there a motion to approve to adopt the agenda?
So
I
moved.
see Ms. Pettit, and then I hear Dr. Swetchenow. So we'll have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda. Any discussion? If not, Mr. Hawley, can we vote on that, please?
Dr. Lorenz,
Yes.
Ms. Pettit,
Yes.
Dr. Swetchenow,
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Mr. Doherty.
Yes.
At this point, our first item is school reopening plans, and I will turn the floor over to Dr. Kraus to begin a presentation, which will include discussion with the board at a later point in her presentation.
And I'm trying to figure out how to share my screen because when I clicked off of it, it says my meeting should start in a few seconds. Am I still in the meeting?
We can see you and hear you. We don't see your shared screen.
Because I don't have my button is gone. My whole face is gone.
You're still
So
with us.
But I don't, I can't be with, I am not with you. I'm with you in spirit.
If you
So
move your mouse to the bottom, a menu should show up along the bottom and share screen. John knows.
Not if it's telling her she's not in the meeting.
Click that screen and then share.
There we go.
She's back.
Oops.
She's back, I think.
oh, so now can you all see the,
Click that, then share. Now you're not going to see yourself.
I don't need to see myself. I'm good.
They're going to see you.
So you all can see the, can you all see the presentation?
You need to select the presentation screen, I think, Amy.
Yep,
We're seeing your Zoom startup screen.
that's what we thought we did. I apologize.
No problem.
On my desktop here. There's the presentation. That's what I want to share.
There we go.
Now
There
you
we
can
go.
see it. Yay. Okay. Thank you. We good? Thank you. The difference between working on a Chromebook, just from a point of reference as we try to test drive some of the way we're doing business, the difference between operating on a Chromebook and being able to operate on our desktops with multiple screens. of how we conduct meetings. This is a little challenging. So just something to keep in mind as, as we make decisions about how we do board meetings, that's a bit of a challenge. We'll figure it out. I'll get better at it. Okay, so I apologize. All right, so our first order of business tonight, or discussion rather, is to just sort of provide an update on the reopening planning and where we are in our progress. Prior to the meeting tonight, the governor spoke at 5:30. So while we were getting set up, I was trying to listen to the governor to see if there would be any indication that would impact our discussion tonight. And he spoke mostly about increased concerns and the need for mask wearing. There was nothing specific to K-12 tonight in the press conference. So uh, that is somewhat indicative of how we've been operating in school districts, is being very reactive to, okay, the changing guidance of today impacts how we make decisions tomorrow. So I would like to say before we start, the level of patience and dedication of our staff, of our administrative team, of the staff that's been involved in reopening planning, the patience of staff members as we've tried to pivot and react to changing guidance as often as daily during the governor's press conference, is greatly appreciated. Those are moving parts that the general public wouldn't see, but it is our primary focus of what we do all day. So, it's simply a testament to how dedicated the folks are here. So I want to start by saying that anything we talk about tonight is prefaced by as we know it and understand it today. We did receive the guidance for K-12 just the Thursday before 4th of July weekend. So what was that? July 2nd, we received that and have tried to incorporate all of that into this presentation tonight. So that's where we are. I'm going to give you sort of an overview of what the presentation will look like. This is meant to be an interactive conversation. I will say that without the dual screen, right now I can't see the board members' faces. So if they're, typically I would be kind of watching and be like, oh, it looks like you might have a question. I can't see you right now because I can only see my screen. So people are going to have to speak up in order to participate in this group discussion, just as a point of how we might do business. Oh, thank you. Okay, so the purpose of tonight is to give you a status update on our action plan, to conduct a public discussion with the board that considers the agency guidelines regarding health safety that we are following, the academic and social emotional needs of our students, staff developed scenarios that have been worked on over the course of the last few weeks, and survey data from families and survey data from staff. Ultimately, what we need to do tonight is determine the feasibility of offering an in-person option, whether that be all in-person, or whether it be some sort of a blended option, but to determine the feasibility of bringing students back face-to-face. And then we have to establish a face coverings policy. That was part of the guidance from the governor, is a requirement that every school district have a face covering policy. So tonight will be the first policy. Before we start, there are some realities, just some things that I think are important to say out loud and to remind everybody that regardless of whatever plan we move forward with for next year, it's important to remember that there is no plan that looks like pre-COVID-19. Within the data, when I talk to families, as a parent myself, as an educator, you know what plan I want is I want to go back to normal. And that's what we hear over and over. But understand that within the parameters in which we operate, there is no plan that can do that. There is not going to be a plan that we come out of that we're able to develop that is business as usual. That's just not in the cards for us for this fall, or until there's a vaccine, or until the science about about the virus changes, improves, whatever that is. Right now, there is no plan. A reality is that our primary charge as a school district is the safety and education of students. That's why we exist, is to educate and support students and to keep them safe. The reality is that budgets and staffing is a finite number. They are constrained. For lack of a better word, we have budget concerns. We are in uh, um, a position of some failed levies, two failed levies. A financial conversation will come up tonight. Our budget is I would say fixed, but the reality is we're continuing to look for ways to reduce our budget. And staffing is fixed. We're not in a position where we can add additional staff to create scenarios. We're doing that with
Amy, we lost your sound. We lost your audio.
um, apologies. Plans must be our plans that we develop have to be flexible enough to respond to changing guidance from both state and local agencies and throughout the year. And we have to be able to consider changing safety risks. Again, as I said earlier, should we get a vaccine, or should we get information that the virus is more dangerous than what we currently think it is? Our plans have to be able to react to that. And finally, it's a reality that we are a public institution. We're a public school district that takes federal and state funds. So we have to operate within specific rules and regulations. There are things that we cannot control, that we must respond to. So, that's the baseline for how these plans are developed. I felt like it was important to remind everybody that those are sort of the rules of doing business, the rules of engagement. When we talk about the guidance that we're using, this is the guidance that our school as an agency now, is it back?
Yes.
Okay. The guidance that we are following is based on the guidance recommended from our governing bodies. I've listed those guidance documents that we have referenced in the development of our plans and our recommendations tonight, and they are all linked there for you. Just as a quick review of what has been accomplished already this year and how we have done business from March to May, which is when the pandemic began and the governor closed us down, closed schools down. We provided remote learning. During that time, we did seek regular feedback from families to adjust to that, to try to improve during that scenario. And we began to seek questions and concerns from staff so that we could start to develop our plans once the school year ended. We identified reopening work groups. We collected some summary feedback from families at the very end of the year, like what's your gut reaction about what worked and what didn't work, to help us make sure that we address those major concerns. We knew that the remote learning that we provided in the spring was last minute. We knew that we could do better and that our plan would have to be better for the fall. So we used that feedback that we gathered from staff and from families to improve that. We created and participated in systems of networking with colleagues in different agencies. For instance, I meet with area school superintendents weekly, and that includes Hamilton County Public Health. So, as an example of these networks of colleagues that we use to try to solve problems together, and we developed a system where we were communicating with staff daily and families weekly at that time. Then once school ended until today, the reopening work groups developed the scenarios that'll be described tonight. We received family feedback that was meant to inform those work groups. That was on June 19th, rather. That is linked on our website. The raw data for that's been redacted for people's names that might have been mentioned, but that's available if someone wanted to view that full raw data of feedback, but that was simply used internally by our work groups. I began to identify what are the protocols and procedures that we're going to have in writing. What are the things that we have to, more questions than answers. How are we going to take temperatures? How are we going to distance students? How are we going to ensure distancing? Those kinds of things. We began to estimate costs associated with different plans. We received our guidance on July 2nd from the state. The reopening work groups got back together to adjust their plans based on that guidance. And then just this past week, on July 10th, we sought feedback from staff internally to try to give us some insight, and also from family. That data has been redacted for anyone's names that might have been involved, and that is also linked within the presentation and on our website. And we drafted the first draft of a face covering policy um, with legal counsel, and I can see a typo on that draft that's missing the word policy on that presentation that we'll fix. I can see a typo on that now. Then what happens next after this meeting and through August? We have to communicate any changes that are going to impact our families. What are the things that have to happen so that they can start to adjust? That's what we hear over and over again. I've heard lots of opinions about how we should do business, but the number one all of them are couched in we just need to know, because families need to figure out how to how to go back to school in the fall. What are they going to do with their children? How are they going to support and supervise their children? That is of critical concern to our families. We have to determine how to implement. Are there going to be thresholds for changing scenarios? In the fall, or in the spring rather, we closed and went to remote learning because the governor said we had to do that. Are there going to be additional local controls about making that decision? And will Hamilton County Public Health help us make those decisions? And we have to adopt a face mask policy and implement that. We do have to finalize all of our protocols. What will we do when there's a positive case? How will we assess symptoms? What are our protocols for hand washing? How will we ensure sanitizing? And then we will have to continue to work with Hamilton County Public Health. I've said this in writing in our Tiger Talk, but I will say for the general public, the Loveland City Schools is in 3 counties. We are in Hamilton County, Claremont, and Warren County. But for the purposes of governance, the city of Loveland, including fire and rescue, and the schools, defers to the Hamilton County Public Health. Every agency can only defer to one public health system, and Loveland points towards the Hamilton County Public Health System. So that's why we continue to work with them. then how are we going to start school? We will have a parent Q&A session prior to the requirement or the request for parents to make a decision about how to start school. Should we determine tonight that there will be an in-person model, parents will have to select an in-person or remote model if we determine tonight that that's an option. If that's the case, there will be a Q&A session. We will offer those 3 times during the week of July 27th. We'll provide details about time.
Do you anticipate those will be virtual or in person?
I currently anticipate those to be virtual, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. I think we just need to work through, could we host an in-person model? And what time of day might those work and how that would work. I am open to doing those in person if we can work through some of those details, Eileen. My preference would always be in person, but if we can't accommodate distancing and the safety protocols without knowing the number of people that were coming, we have to sort of think through that. To me, if we're talking about having school in person, then we ought to be able to have a Q&A in person.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of, controlling for the number of people. Is there an RSVP or a sign up? ? But my preference would be to have those be in person, Eileen.
Okay, thank you.
Then the deadline for parents committing to an in-person model or remote learning, again, should we determine tonight that we're going to offer an in-person model, parents would have to commit to one another, and that deadline would be the 2nd. The week of the 17th to the 21st, which was the amendment to our calendar that we did at our previous meeting. The purpose of doing that is so that we can educate and train staff on the protocols that we'll develop and practice those scenarios. So much like we're practicing this in person tonight and trying to adjust to what works, what doesn't work, what kind of technical support or support we would need to pull that off, we would need to do that first week of school. So the best laid plans on paper. When you put humans, particularly little humans, in those procedures, we'll need to practice and adapt those. That's what that first week will be for. And then instruction would begin on the 26th. So as we discussed tonight and as we did our work internally, the priorities for returning to school are to primarily to these 4 priorities. We have to consider the health and safety of our students and staff, particularly the most vulnerable or including the most vulnerable of those populations. We have to design plans for student learning and effective teaching. We have to execute the return to school in an efficient and responsible manner. 4,600 students and 500 staff members to execute a return to school in an efficient and responsible manner. The more layers that we add to that, the more challenging that becomes, trying to simplify some of those decisions. And then we have to obviously develop the protocols for the health guidance. Are there any questions about those priorities? Thank you. There are some specific requirements from the Ohio Department of Education that we have to make sure that are accounted for in all of our plans. One of them is to vigilantly, I'm using their language, to vigilantly assess for symptoms. What are our procedures for assessing for symptoms of staff and students? How are we going to put that in place? How are we going to ensure that we are assessing for symptoms? We have to have plans for washing and sanitizing hands of both adults and students. How will we do that? Will we build in breaks? One of the things that we've already put into place is installed hand sanitizing stations outside of every classroom to ensure that students and staff have access to that product. for example. Thoroughly cleaning and sanitizing the school environment to limit the spread of shared surfaces. How are we ensuring that every classroom has their own cleaning supplies? How are we making sure that there is staff available to clean throughout the day? How are we ensuring that should there be um, a positive case within an area that we are doing extra sanitizing? What are the plans for that? And those are required as part of our plan. And then how are we going to practice social distancing? Additionally, the plans have to be developed to transition. Should we determine tonight that there'll be an in-person model, we have to have a plan for how do we transition between the two of those, and when would that happen? And then again, we have to implement a face coverings policy. So the way we're trying to figure all of these things out in an ever-changing environment, for those of you who know me and have been around me for a while, I love a Venn diagram because nothing happens in school districts in isolation. So if you look on the right there, there's operational protocols. It's the answers to how will we ensure that we're vigilantly checking symptoms? How will we ensure we're cleaning? How will we deal with transportation? How will we feed children? Those are operational protocols. But then there's also the logistics. What happens when you implement all of those things with people, with actual humans in the building? How do you move people? How do you accommodate that, train people, support people in doing those things? And one has to inform the other, so that here is the procedure let's look at a health procedure. Here's the procedure that the district health nurse and the health team recommends. Then the logistics team that's working has to say, how is that practical and how are we able to implement that? And then those things have to go back and forth to develop that district plan and those protocols. So it is a process of going back and forth between the two. So some of the operational protocols that we're talking about, what they're responsible for, this is under John Ames' leadership. They're responsible for utilizing the guidance that's given to us by those formal agencies. They have to meet with their appropriate implementation groups. If we're talking about transportation, then we need to meet with transportation. If we're talking about food service, then we need to meet with food service in order to talk about how to talk about what those protocols would be. Then they have to take those protocols and run them through the logistics group to see, is it possible to actually implement that with human beings within the system called school. And then we have to communicate those protocols out. And these are some of the groups. John, did you want to add anything about the plans for operational protocols or how that's organized moving forward?
Well, the custodial, maintenance, food service, transportation, all of these groups, we've been working all summer to prepare for this. We have been purchasing items that are needed. We've been working with the district health team, which contains our nurses and health aides, to try to identify things that need to be done in different buildings to solve issues that come up. So each one of these groups has been meeting with me daily to try to make sure we have everything in place. Now that we're getting closer to school and we're having a little bit better idea of how we're going to operate, we will be able to finalize many of the items that have been up in the air or we've been hoping to find out. So we're getting very close to the whole thing right now.
So that's one of the reasons, once we decide tonight whether we're going to have an in-person model or not, whether we're going to have kids in school, then that directs those protocols about how we would do some of those things, right, John? Then the other side of that Venn diagram is this logistics and planning for students and staff, and they're charged with creating educational plans and plans to support the social emotional needs of students. They're charged with addressing access and equity for all students, making sure that all students can access the plans regardless of whether you're in person remotely or full-time, or whether it's a blended model. And then they need to review those operational things and say, okay, how are we going to put that into our plan? How are we going to assign and systematically put time to those protocols? And Andrea has been leading those groups. Andrea, do you want to add some things to that overview?
Yeah, so this particular group is made up primarily, it's broken down by building, and very purposefully, we wanted to make sure that those teams were comprised of teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, and administrative assistants from each of those buildings, so that we had multiple viewpoints as we were creating these plans. What's interesting is, this concept of a district plan, but then it gets down the logistical piece for each building, because each building is a different size, each classroom's a different size students, all those things have to come into play. So this work group started and launched in early June, has met multiple times to kind of refine plans in between the survey data that has been sent out. And we are at the point now that after tonight's meeting, we're relaunching again next Tuesday to put some finalize some touches, and then we are looping back in the operational logistics group that John just spoke about, so we can make sure that we have accurately included all of those protocols within our individual plans.
Questions about that system that we have in place to for planning? All right, thank you. So we did survey staff and families pretty quickly. We sent that out and closed that down yesterday morning so that we could try to provide some data feedback and some general data feedback tonight. So we did have a total of 2,000, just over 2,000 people participate in the survey. In general, what they represented, that orange section is is families or respondents that said they had a student in grades 5 through 12. The gray said they had a student in grade pre-K through 4, and the black piece of the pie said that they had a student in both. So just to give you a picture of the demographic of who responded to our survey. I have been overwhelmed by the willingness of our families to provide us that feedback. And I can assure you that we utilize that in depth in our planning. And your words are not unread. We utilize that, and I am very appreciative. We are all very appreciative that you take the time to do that. So thank you.
Amy, I just want to interrupt for a second. Can you give us an overview? 2,000 responses sounds like a great number of responses, and obviously everybody's very interested in their opinion on this. How many families send children to Loveland schools?
I don't know the answer to that. We do have about 4,500 students enrolled. So, if you guessed, that's about half. What I don't know is if families entered more than one response because they had multiple children. Even though both was an option, somebody might have entered more than one. And I mean, the truth of it is it was an open Google link that was not restricted. So I can't guarantee that somebody didn't enter information into the survey that doesn't actually have a student. Now, as I look through the feedback, people are pretty passionate about their own student. It doesn't seem overwhelmingly like people did that, but I mean, that feels like, based on that data, that's a large percentage of our families are represented, but I couldn't give you an accurate, a scientific answer, if that makes sense.
Well, I think your answer is really good. To have a survey sent out on that short of a period of time and get 50% response rate, even if it's not perfectly accurate. It is a wonderful survey to know the pulse of the community, so to speak.
And this is not the first time we've had that kind of feedback. I mean, since we've started remote feedback, we've sent out multiple opportunities for and solicited parent feedback, and our parents have just jumped right in to provide that to us, and um, it is appreciated. For lack of a better word, appreciated seems like an underwhelming word. It is genuinely used, and I think it speaks a lot for how involved our community, our families want to be in these decisions. We did ask staff as well. Um, Certified. The primary focus of this was certified staff, meaning teaching staff. It's not that we did not exclude classified staff, but the comments, the questions were generally targeted towards teaching staff, and classified staff in general isn't looking at their emails over the summer. That isn't necessarily the way that we would be engaging our classified staff. If we wanted feedback from transportation, we would go meet with transportation. Our transportation director would reach out to them directly to make sure that all of their voices were heard. So we did ask people to say whether they were certified or classified, but for the purposes of this, we're only going to talk about our certified staff responses, just as a clarification. So a total of 72% of our certified staff did participate in the survey, and you can see a breakdown there by building, of what percentage per building did participate in that staff survey. Questions about that before I move on?
Amy, this is another open survey, so you do or you don't know that these were actually individual employees and all that, right? It's just same thing as the earlier one.
Actually, this one was limited to people with a Loveland. This one was an internal one, so you had to have your own Loveland address, email address to participate in this one. So I can ensure, while I can't ensure that somebody clicked that they were certified and not classified and they gave false information on that, there was really no reason to do that. I can ensure that these people did have a Loveland email address and did that internally.
Right, so this one's validated, the other one was open, but
Validated is a strong word. Let's be clear. This is Amy Krause created the surveys by herself. Validated makes it. I didn't vet. I'm not certified in developing surveys, so I can ensure that they were done. They were Loveland Loveland employees that filled it out.
Yeah, you're good. Thank you.
And again, I want to chime in on top of that. The amount of feedback that you obtained in a very short period of time shows not only did you reach everybody very well, but how interested everybody is in giving their opinion.
Absolutely. I've been when we first closed down, I began emailing staff updates every day, and there were literally times when I would email them twice in one day because what I would say to them at one point in the day changed because the governor would give a press conference and things would change. It ultimately ended up being just once a day, and then when the school year ended, I asked them, I'm like, once a day seems like a lot, but what would you like? And a large number of staff responded to that they preferred once a week unless something big happened or there was something a big change that they needed to know about. So I have been continuing with that in emailing staff weekly, unless there's a need for an additional one. So I do think that staff is engaged in updates, and many of them reply to me. I think that given the situation of being remote, I feel like we have a high level of staff engagement. They are very positive and very much want to develop a plan to make sure that we're educating students. So now that's sort of the overview of how we got to tonight. So my objectives here for this discussion is to discuss the different scenarios that we have, and with the focus on what is the impact on our students, what's the impact on our parents, what are costs related to that and impact on costs and budget, and what does the feedback data sort of say in general about each of those scenarios. Ultimately, what we need to do tonight is have a recommendation for, is there going to be an in-person model? Are we going to offer a way to bring students into school when allowed, based on based on our governing bodies or the local incidence of community spread. So will we be doing that? That's ultimately what we want to come out of tonight, throughout this scenario. So I encourage you as a board to think about the scenarios in that, knowing that your opinion and your thoughts about whether an in-person model is feasible based on this information, to ask the questions related to that. The team is all here together, prepared to answer those questions. My plan is I'll provide the general overview, but everyone is here prepared to answer those questions that are about why, how we might do those things or what we're thinking about and why the recommendation is the way it is within the scenario. So we'll proceed with that and speak up. So far, you just speaking up has worked for me, even though I can't see your faces. It seems weird to me. So we're going to start with scenario 3. And the only reason we're calling it scenario 3 and it seems out of turn is, as we've done our surveys, anytime we've done communication, we have referred to our fully remote model as scenario 3. We need to retire that title, but that has been just for a consistency and clarity purposes. We're going to call that scenario 3 because that's how we've referred to it in all of our communications so far. But scenario 3 represents our remote online academy, how we would be providing remote instruction. And that could look like something that is, if we're offering an in-person model, it could look like a family choosing to do that. I as a parent, am not comfortable sending my child to school with the in-person model, so I'm going to select the online option that will run concurrently, simultaneously with an in-person model, if that's how we choose to proceed. That commitment would have to be by semester because we need to staff. Or it is what would be implemented when the district was ordered closed due to the pandemic. And that's to indicate that what we did last spring out of the blue was not at all of the quality that this online academy, this online remote learning intends to be, at a much higher level of uh, quality than what we were able to provide in the spring when we had to do that very quickly. And it could be what the district offers if it's the only offering that we choose. If the district tonight determines that an in-person model is not feasible and we do not wish to offer that, then this is what we would be offering. So again, scenario 3 for consistency purposes, but from here forward, we need to refer to this as our remote academy, our online, what our offering online. That was going to look like having clear expectations. We heard this in the feedback. We need to have clear expectations for teachers and for staff and for students. Like, what will teachers be doing for lesson planning and offering face-to-face Zoom opportunities, scheduling? We have to have clear expectations for students. What are their expectations for participation, for completion, for engagement? Our Loveland teachers will be providing that. You might hear about other school districts who are contracting with online uh, vendors, Virtual Learning Academy, Apex, Edgenuity, some different opportunities. Our online academy will be our own Loveland teachers. The curriculum will be aligned and pacing for what's happening in person should we be offering that. And it will be that will be done so that if a student or group of students would have to be quarantined due to community spread or contact tracing, they would be able to move over and continue to get their education in that online academy with the intention of making that seamless. That's the overview. Do you have
Amy?
specific? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, this is Kathy. Just a clarification, this would be separate from, if we have an in-person model, this is separate from the in-person class. So we are not, this is an academy that is a separate entity, and Loveland teachers would not be instructing an in-class and trying to do the academy in conjunction with their in-class class. Is that correct?
Go ahead and answer that, Andrea, just because, I mean, the answer is that's correct, but I'm going to let
Yes.
Andrea answer it because she has probably more in-depth knowledge about if you have a follow-up question.
Yes, Kathy, you are correct. These are our intention anyway, is that the curriculum is aligned for this seamless piece, so that the curriculum that we are delivering is Loveland curriculum. If, let's say, for instance, there's a vaccine in October and parents now feel more comfortable to have their children return to in-person schooling, let's say at the change of the semester, the pacing of the curriculum will be the same, and that students would be able to kind of move into that. So no teachers who would be delivering the online version that we're referring to now, the one that's actually chosen by the families from the beginning, would not also be your in-person teachers. These would be teachers who we've determined are going to be our online instructors.
Thank you. That answers what I was getting at. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So when we think about this remote option, what are the implications of that? What's the impact on students? Remember, we were going to talk about these different sort of buckets or these different ways to review the models. So what's the impact on students if we are fully remote, or you're choosing as a parent to go remote? Obviously, there's a lower risk of exposure for the students and staff involved in that model, exposure to the virus. However, the trade-off on that, it is difficult to meet the academic and social emotional needs. Certainly there'll be plans developed to address those, but that will be far more difficult than it would be in person. That's just a reality or an implication of that. And I apologize, I see another typo, and typos bother me, so I'm going to circle that on my hard copy with that extra little semicolon out there under impact to students. Then what's the impact on families? If we're fully remote, the impact on families is, supervision and support of our students, and the impact on work schedules. Again, another typo. Supervision and support for students, and then what's the impact on our families' work schedules? I'm wildly aware of the impact when we call a snow day. And it's one day when families have to accommodate that. When we're talking about remote learning full time, that's a significant impact on our families for how they're going to support their students and or supervise them and still continue to work. There are costs associated. None of these plans are free. We have to continue to operate. Um, we still have continued operating costs. Our staff is still working, and depending on the time frame, it's hard to completely predict what kind of savings might be related to the remote work. Although Mr. Hawley can talk about the savings that we experienced in the spring and try to make some predictions. And then the general feedback data that we'll talk about on the next slide is, overall, this scenario had great family concern and frankly, staff concern about, regarding meeting the needs of the students. So that's the overall impact. If you have specific questions or would like a more deeper understanding of that impact, the team can answer those questions. But what are your thoughts about the impact of fully remote learning?
Amy, I don't understand the cost comment. Uh, If the basis of this one is that the face-to-face in-person experience is not happening, if I understood right, scenario 3 is a pure remote model for the district. If I've got that wrong, my question changes, but if I've got that right, one would think that there's a variety of areas that are less expensive in that model. So could you comment on that?
I'll let Kevin comment on that, but I'm going to back up briefly to recall that this remote this could be a couple of different. We can look at this in a couple of different ways. If the district chooses to provide an in-person model, then the remote is for families that choose it, and it is in response to a closure due to community spread around the virus. Or the district could choose to not provide any in-person learning, in which case looking at savings would be different. So this scenario 3 can exist in two different worlds until we decide tonight whether an in-person model is feasible or desirable by the district. So I'm going to preface it by that, and then the questions can go to Kevin about specificity around that. Does that help to clarify that before you ask your question, Mr. Doherty?
Yes. So Kevin, going to go into a little more on that one then?
So please feel free to ask those questions specific, and he'll be happy to answer those.
Yeah, so I can go into the specifics on that, Kevin. So, if you're looking at basically doing scenario 3 in a long-term situation, it'd be very similar to what we just experienced in March through the end of June, where we still provided services, yet the buildings were closed. So I do agree with you that there would be, in that particular case, it would be the most cost effective if you're actually doing it for an extended period of time. And we know that we're doing it for an extended period of time. The costs in this particular case on this one aren't necessarily very specific, because we were looking at it, and this would be more on the instructional side, is that it's not necessarily a preferred option, if you will. So when we talk about costs, if it's something that we're kind of coming in and out of, let's say we're going to start the year off with a particular in-person option, yet due to unforeseen circumstances, or in many ways foreseen circumstances, that we have to kind of jump in and out of a in-person model into a not-person model, we would see savings in that particular case. But what that would depend on is definitely the extended time frame, so the length of the time frame, or how often we're going to be in and out of that. In that particular case, where we would see savings, and we're probably going to talk about a little bit more with the finance conversation, but If you look at basically the May forecast versus what we saw, actually what happened at the end of the year, our cash balance is better off by roughly about $700,000. That's also based on some revenue. So when we're talking about expenses, on the expense side, you're looking at just about $345,000 better. It's because of a lot of different options or a lot of different reasons, but mainly if you look at what we can control, we saw roughly $170,000 in supplies being saved and $70,000 both on benefits and purchase services. So there would be some savings, but it just depends on how often we're bouncing in and out of it.
So the way I think about this then is if we have both, we have the school buildings open and in-person learning, and we have the academy. We're still got to run the buses, the schools, et cetera. So savings are probably more modest. If we went to a all academy version, theoretically, we'd shut the buildings, stop the busing, whole bunch of different things, and the savings would presumably be higher. And the problem that you're talking about here is that you don't know whether we've got pure A, pure B, or A plus B.
Correct. Yeah, and even when we're talking about when we say depending on how often or extended time frame, we were more speaking to the potential of honestly governing forces making us close down and having to do a remote option 100% of the time.
Right. I'm okay. You can stop there. You guys have answered the questions for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you. So if we look at just in general, the scenario data, I summarized that and said there was a concern on both family and staff about going when we are in remote, understanding to Mr. Doherty's point, as he pointed out, there's a choice. We can choose to just go fully remote, or we can understand that the likelihood is that governing bodies and community spread may demand that we go remote for undetermined lengths of time, depending on how that's addressed in our region. When Mr. Hawley said it's not necessarily a preferred model, he's referring to this data that is consistent between staff and families. You can see that. So when we asked staff, for those watching, when we asked this survey, we gave a Likert scale. We asked about what's your comfort level of the different models, with 5 being I am the most comfortable, and with 1 being I am the least comfortable. So when we say in this particular case that 65.2% of the respondents said that they were not comfortable with fully remote, that meant that we added 1 and 2 together. The people who said they were the least comfortable at 1 and 2, and that were most comfortable was at 24%. You can see that there was, 13% of our staff was not comfortable, and 37 was more comfortable, and about 50% sort of hung in the middle. When I read the staff anecdotal data, here's what I would say. They don't like either option. They know that they can't provide for the academics and the social emotional needs of our students when they're together, but they're also concerned about exposure and risk for both the students and themselves. And so that's a very challenging question for them to answer. They don't want to go fully remote, but the fears associated both academically and health wise for our students, it is very real for them. So when Kevin Hawley says it's not a preferred model, you can see on this survey data that overwhelmingly people are not saying yes, let's be remote. So I think that's important for the board to consider about whether we offer an in-person model or not. A fully remote model is not supported or preferred, rather, by both our families and our staff. So then we talk about some in-person models.
Sorry, Amy,
And I'm sorry.
no,
Yes.
it's my fault. I was slow to unmute. Before we go back to that, and you don't need to answer this now because I'm sure it's going to be in the meat of your presentation. If we develop a online academy, how well does that model absorb a sudden influx of participants when they started as an in-person, but now we're closed for 2 weeks for whatever reason? So it's something else to think about, is that we'll need flexibility in that system too, which may be difficult for teachers who have been teaching in person to suddenly be asked to teaching online. And we know how that went in the spring.
I'll let Andrea talk about that. The work groups have discussed that, so I'll let Andrea provide some better insight into that.
Yeah.
And you
So
don't need to do that now. You can do that whenever.
No,
that's fine.
I think it would be beneficial for you to hear the work
Mhm.
that they've done, because it is
Right.
intended very much to be different than what happened in
Right.
the spring.
Absolutely. So, when we brought to the board the idea of amending the calendar, it was to build in both the safety protocols as well as really aligning our curricular pieces so that if we have to move into a full remote situations, our teachers will be able, because there are strategically built in days throughout that calendar. So if you were to go back and look at the calendar, you'll see there are 2 days that are the end of each quarter, so that we can kind of keep that curriculum aligned, so that when we have to make that switch to a full remote, those teachers who are in-person teachers can then take their classes and move into fully remote. So yes, it was a big topic of conversation when we had our work groups together, and the teachers were very open and very honest and strategic about talking about how they could work together in their planning times to make that a better, more seamless process. So that certainly is the intention.
And they are planning for what would their lessons look
Yeah.
like. I mean, here's the reality. There, the likelihood of us, let's say we decide tonight to offer an in-person model. The truth of it is the reality of that happening all school year is low. We have our governor just came on tonight to talk about greater concerns about spread. We have a color-coded system within our counties that talk about increased spread. The likelihood that we are going to have to go remote for some period of time because of an outbreak in our region, we have to prepare for that likelihood. And so our teachers are working on what would online instruction look like? How can we do better than what we did in the spring when we had to do that literally overnight? They're taking that very seriously. Does that start to address your question, Eric?
No, that's great. I have additional concerns for the reasons that you mentioned, but we can cover those later.
Thank you. So as we shift to in-person models, the point here is, are we going to offer an in-person model? And we have provided two tonight for consideration and discussion, but it's not both. It's either. Question one, are we going to provide an in-person model for our students and our families? And if so, which one of these would we offer? If that makes sense. We're not talking about offering all three, both kinds of in-person. That just simply is not efficient and responsible. If you can look back at what were our guiding principles, it is too much to manage both for our families, for our students, and internally. How would you manage all three of them? So the end request here, or the end objective here, is do we offer an in-person model? And here are two options for us to discuss, if that provides some clarity around what's going to happen next. So scenario one, again, for the purposes of clarity of how we've communicated that in over the last few weeks, scenario one is really, that's the comeback 5 day a week. That is full capacity. And the definition of full capacity would be full capacity of those families who chose the in-person model, understanding that there would be a percentage of our families who did not wish to do that. They did not feel like that was what was appropriate for their child or their family, so they would choose the remote academy option. That will be available and offered for families who do not wish to participate in a 5 day a week full capacity. And again, full capacity defined by whatever the enrollment would be of selecting to come full capacity. Does my definition of that or explanation of that make sense? Because I can't see your faces looking, making the questioning look.
Yes.
Yeah, Amy, I don't know if you're going to get to this later on, but I've got a couple of questions about this model. Will you be getting into more detail, or is this as detailed as you're getting?
I will be getting into more detail, but if we don't answer your detail, ask them when we get onto the next slide is going to talk a little bit a few more details.
All
So
right.
if we don't get there, that would be a great place to stop and ask the team.
Okay, go ahead.
So the 5 day a week, understanding that we will be putting health and safety precautions in place as required. Facial coverings for staff will always be required because that is the requirement from the governor and the ODE. But in this case, 6 feet distancing would not be able to be provided in all cases. Looking at the American Academy of Pediatrics, suggesting that looking at 3 feet distance would be adequate for students, but in that case, face coverings would be required while in class because students would not be at 6 feet distance. Proper cleaning protocols would be in place. We would not be offering with an in-person model. We would not be offering full day kindergarten. The need to spread out students, the need to provide staff to educate students, knowing that with our littlest tigers, the time taken to clean and sanitize will take away from class time, the ability to add teachers and support to provide that. Additionally, there are great concerns from the team of being able to offer any value add of what a tuition full day kindergarten would cost. So our recommendation would be, if there's an in-person model, that we not offer that full day option this year. The high school arrival time will be moved back by 30 minutes to accommodate the entrance to school, the ability, we don't have high school transportation to accommodate the opportunities for kids to get into school so that we can get to instruction. It will be chosen by semester. You'll have to commit to that for the semester for staffing and planning purposes, and understanding that this plan, we're not committing to that's going to be what's in place for all 180 days of school. We would have to transition to remote learning when that was required. So that's the general overview of what we're currently calling scenario one, but we would call the full capacity model moving forward. So the implications of that about students, obviously, that increases the risk of exposure for students and staff to the virus, but it does increase our ability to meet students' academic and social emotional needs. The impact on, I'm gone again. Now I'm back. It's kind of like a staff meeting. Sometimes you're listening, sometimes you're not. You tune me out. Impact on families is somewhat minimal. It's more like a traditional schedule. Students would be back in person 5 days a week unless you chose to do the remote model. There would be an impact of families that are planning on full day kindergarten that would not be offered. And there would be an impact on families because the high school start time would go later. Um, we would delay the high school start time by 30 minutes. And there are costs associated with this model. And the feedback data in general would suggest that the families have a strong preference for this model, but staff has a concern about this model, and we can look at that data specifically after we talk about this. So what are your specific questions or clarifications regarding the 5-day in-person model?
So I have a few, I'll just throw them out there. What about sports and other outside the classroom activities? What do you do about, I'm not sure at what level students change classrooms. I'm sure it happens in the high school, but I'm not sure if it happens anywhere else. But how do you accommodate the friction or the close proximity of students in the hallways? How do you deal with the lunchroom? And then a number of things about the buses, in terms of density of students on the buses, whether your plans for, sanitizers, masks, et cetera. Are there seating strategies, things like that. So that's kind of a laundry list of questions.
So I'm going to separate a few of those out, that those are some operational questions, the lunchroom and the busing questions in general. Obviously, if you think back to that earlier Venn diagram, we have to work through how does that actually play out, but there are some rules and regulations around that and some starts of the plans. And so John, can you talk a little bit about the conversations about transportation and the lunchroom and how we might accommodate that?
Yes. As far as transportation, we are currently looking at 2 children per seat, but the rules are going to change here very shortly, we believe, and we don't know exactly where it is going to be. So we are going to have to probably depend upon parents to do some pickup and drop off of their children. But until we get the final word on that, it's going to be very difficult to say which way we're going. As far as the cafeteria, most of the buildings are going to do a partial feeding in their classrooms and a partial feeding in the cafeteria to accommodate the social distancing. We are looking at brown bagging almost all meals. When the classrooms have their meals brought to them, we will have custodial staff or food service staff taking it down to a classroom on a cart for that classroom. We will have to, at the end of that, pick up the trash from that feeding session, and we will then have to clean those desks and the whole area to make sure that there is no residue that could contaminate in the future. So the transportation one is still, I'd like to say we have it down pat. We have the routes down, but how many children are going to be permitted on that bus at one time, we do not know yet.
That's guidance that's going to still need to come, and we're waiting on that guidance about restrictions related to that.
John, I don't know if you had a chance to see it yet, but in your email, there's a Yale study on that I sent you for your information.
Yes, I just read that before the meeting. Very interesting information, and I love the part about the airflow in the bus, and as far as spring and fall, it'd be great to open up all the windows. That is going to solve 90% of the problems on those buses. Winter could be a whole different issue. But the buses, the airflow is pretty much what it is right now. They're not going to be able to do any retrofitting on that. So, but I think going into the fall, it's going to be a lot easier to deal with it unless we have a torrential rainstorm. But that airflow will solve a lot of problems.
I'm not suggesting they're the end all and authority on this, but they had a whole bunch of ideas about.
Oh, it was a very good article.
So I want to circle back. Those were the operational ones. What were the other questions, Kevin? I don't want to.
Sports and other outside the classroom activities.
So
Can I add in their recess and specials? Because I know a lot of parents are waiting to hear about things like that before they make their final decision, obviously. And I know there are a lot of details and changes every day, but what are the initial thoughts on recess and specials as far as having them, not having them? And as Kevin mentioned, moving through the hallways, I mean, that's involved with those as well.
So I'll start with sports. Our sports are governed by the Ohio Athletic Association, and they are operating much like we are. They're stepping forward based on the guidance. And so we respond to the guidance that the sports, that the OHSAA offers. I mean, I don't know the answer to this question, and I don't mean Amy Krause doesn't know the answer. These are the kinds of conversations that I have with my colleagues, other superintendents, and these are the conversations that our athletic directors have. That if Hamilton County schools have to close, we're in the ECC. If Hamilton County schools have to close, West Claremont is in our division or in our league. We're closed, but they're not. What does that mean? I can make some guesses, but I wouldn't begin to predict those things. So we follow the guidelines of the OHSAA regarding sports. And marching band I'll pick marching band, will follow, will utilize or implement those guidelines because that it's outside. You can sort of extrapolate those guidelines to do some of that, would be my expectation. As far as outside groups using the facility, the recommendation is that we limit the outside groups utilizing the facility, particularly in the evenings, so that we can implement our cleaning and sanitation guidelines. That when people are in here in the evenings, that just adds to the cost and adds to the labor and concerns around cleanliness. So those are decisions that we'll have to make moving forward about extracurriculars. Specials and recess. I'll defer to Andrea on that, but that has been something that the work groups have started to work through.
So what I heard in terms of the questions were the classroom changes, recess, and specials. And I just wanted to start by saying the guidance recommends that we attempt to move the fewest number of kids through hallways and common spaces at the same time. So the idea is to limit that exposure. So students come into the classroom. What are all the activities that can happen within the classroom that eliminate, let's say, even an elementary student out from moving around? So for example, classroom changes become a little bit more problematic as probably you get into 7th grade. Typically, we would have even some of our 3rd through 6th grade students in class change, but we've already reworked those plans so that our our teachers are working in teams and teachers are doing the rotating, not the students. We're also looking with grades 7 through 12, and this is even, as you know, more challenging because that's more kids. That's, 7 periods a day that kids are up and moving. Is how can we start looking at staggered hall changes, those types of ideas. I will have to be fully transparent on that, as I hope everybody understands. There's a lot of work to do with our 7th through 12th grade students to make sure we can move through those crowded spaces in a safe manner, and our teams are working very, very diligently on that. The really powerful thing that that our groups worked on with recess is this idea of zones. So playgrounds are divided into zones, and students who are in certain groups stagger their recess time. So students, the intention is that if we are in a full capacity model 5 days a week, that kids are going to get recess. We know that's important. We know that is a part of their development. And so our elementary teams did a wonderful job coming up with how would you have recess per zones, and how would you have that tie in with your lunchroom time, and certain teachers are taking groups out at certain times, and so kids aren't passing, and that stuff's not happening in the hallway. If we were to go with scenario 1 as our option, the idea would be that we have every intention of providing specials. It just might look a little bit different. Again, that idea of passing one another in the hallway, it's really looking at more like how can we bring teachers to the spaces where the students are housed to increase that safety. We're not saying that's ideal. We're not saying that's the best way to teach PE, but we're saying that is our given situation, and we're going to work with our specials teachers when we decide whatever this model is to get a little bit more definitive measures of what that might look like. Of course, when it's beautiful outside, we can take students outside, and that's that answer. But again, much like what John was mentioning with the buses in the winter, that's going to cause another layer of a challenge. So those are the ideas that we're working on now. But again, the guidance is to keep kids from moving and interchanging with other groups and cohorts as much as possible.
Okay. Andrea, I have 3 more things for you that I thought of
Yep.
as you were talking. So
Yep.
sorry. Have you guys discussed 8th graders who take high school classes at the high school? Will that still occur?
Okay, so right now we've been able to work with our staff that we have at the middle school. So we are still going to be able to offer those 8th grade courses, but the wonderful part is we're going to be able to keep them at the middle school so that those, if we move the high school schedule to start 30 minutes later, it was going to cause kind of a blip with getting those students back to the middle school at the right time. So what I thought, one very positive piece that came out of this is we're going to be able to still offer those high school 4-credit courses, but we're doing it at our middle school for this year.
Okay, that sounds good.
Awesome.
The next one, have you guys talked about or considered, and I know we just got away from this, and I'm not saying it's the answer, but something to look at. Lakota is moving to block scheduling to limit the number of kids and amount of time in the hallway each day. Is that something that's been discussed?
I can tell you that a lot of that is going to depend on what in-person model we look at, or what comes out of tonight. I know that the high school has talked about that. I know they've also talked about a variety of scenarios. So has that been discussed? I did hear that conversation. Has that been finalized? Absolutely not, because they're waiting for what comes out of tonight to make some of those final decisions.
Okay, and then my last question, which maybe you, maybe Amy, maybe somebody else, but I like the idea of zones related to recess, but what have we talked about as far as a policy, or maybe not even policy? What is it going to look like if, say, somebody in that zone contracts COVID or a family member does? What about notification? What are we doing there?
So there is a moment in our presentation that addresses some of the things that we're still waiting for guidance on, and contact tracing is one of those. And I think we're not ignoring the question. I just think that might be something we can better talk about when we get to that slide, if that's okay.
Fair enough, yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I'll back up. I don't think there is a slide
Yeah.
about that.
Mm.
In fairness to Andrea, we continue to work on that today based on some additional information we got. But I can't show you this because I'm not on the screen. You can see my screen, but we did receive what the rules are or the expectations are about exactly what you're saying, Eileen, about contact tracing and notification. We just received those this week, and I have not even sat down with Judy Leamy, our district nurse, to discuss what does that look like. I will say that what is written down on the paper is sort of a best case scenario from a timing standpoint, but in practice, it's going to take much longer. So that is an operational protocol that we're going to have to define prior to school starting.
Okay. And then I think I have a question that might be John, I don't know. Could be anybody, I guess. I just thought of another thing. Lakota, again, sorry, that's what I've been following in my other life, but we've always been trained as teachers, keep our doors closed and locked. Moving into this school year, we are being told to keep our doors open all the time. One, I'm assuming it increases the airflow, which helps. And then two, it limits the number of people touching the doorknob. I know that's kind of a minor detail, but I think some people are a little nervous about things like that. Is it something that's on the radar and been talked about?
I can jump in on that, John, if that's okay. I did hear teachers talking about that as they were talking about cleaning protocols and how they were going to wipe down door handles between each group of student coming into their space, as well as the cleaning protocols for each student desk. So if you're thinking from a high school perspective, first period gets up and leaves, how are we making sure we're building in opportunities to clean those desks, as well as clean heavily touched surfaces like door handles in between groups. So I heard that discussion. I think that is a great idea, and it's definitely something that can be incorporated into a plan.
Okay, thank
And
you.
very quickly, one of the other items that you spoke of, the air conditioning or having the doors open. I'm meeting with our filtration people and on Friday, excuse me, to discuss filtration and how that could impact, either slow the flow of air or increase the flow of air. So we're preparing for that. As far as opening the doors, that's interesting. I had not heard that one yet, but that's a great idea. So we'll keep that one in mind. Thank you.
Amy, I have two thoughts, one for sort of minimal and one a sort of a larger discussion, neither of which need to be dealt with right now, but I sort of wanted them to be on the record. The first minor one is I'm sure that consideration has been given to the music program. There's a lot of information out there about singing and that kind of activity contributing to the spread of the virus. So I just wanted to say that I'm sure that's been considered. My second question surrounds transportation. And I wanted to confirm that we are, although there is no high school busing, and although because there's no high school busing, there is no private or parochial high school busing, there is still busing to the Great Oaks campuses. And I imagine that it's being worked on how that would happen because that's a contract with Great Oaks. And then I have been approached, and I believe other board members may have been as well, with some concerned community members concerning the impact of not having high school buses and the families that it affects perhaps more than other families. And so what I'm hearing about transportation is that we don't have the information yet about exactly how many buses we need to go where and how they're going to be filled with students. But I wondered what would be the appropriate time for community entities that were interested in helping some of our families. When would they be encouraged to contact Mr. Ames perhaps to talk a little bit about transportation in its larger sense?
So as far as when we hope to know after next Tuesday. When is the governor speaking next? I thought he had another thing coming out. Anyway, as soon as the governor gives us a good idea of anything else, we will start working on our final plans for transportation. We have the routes done.
Oh, you mean when will the governor be providing transportation guidance?
Yes, yes.
I
yes.
don't know the answer to
Right.
that.
We currently have all of our routes completed, and we have them based upon current levels. If we have to start cutting students back, then we are going to have to start doing double routes for neighborhoods to get to the different buildings. So I would like, we will need to know by the end of July what we're going to do. And so if we have parents that are interested between now and the end of July, we would need to know. That answer?
Okay, I understand that. And are you able to tell me at this point, students going to the Great Oaks, would they be responsible to get themselves to the high school and there would be transportation to Great Oaks, to Live Oaks from there, or is something else happening?
That is correct. They have to get to the high school, and we have the shuttles going to all the Oaks. And we are working directly with the high school counselors to confirm that we have and we know who all those students are.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Other questions, clarifications about full capacity, the in-person model of having school students in here 5 days a week, full capacity as defined by how many families opted for that.
Amy, I have a question regarding that, and it's actually probably based on looking at the end of this slide. It's probably on the next slide. I think that we can see that there's going to be an inherent problem between what the families who live in the community desire and what the staff who's providing that service require. I can very clearly see the reasons for that. Do you care to comment on that survey data?
I went ahead and pulled
the same question as well.
I went ahead and pulled that up while you were talking, Eric, so that you can see the general data regarding that, what you just asked. So 58%, again, that 5 meant I am extremely confident sending my child to school in that model. Understanding that what they received was that very general overview. I mean, obviously, we don't have the details. We have actually more details tonight than what we did when we sent out the scenarios on Thursday. That is an ever evolving process. So that was within, very general terms, 58% of our families chose I am comfortable 4 and 5 to do that. And 30% of our families said they were not comfortable of the respondents said they were not comfortable. Staff was in the 29% saying they were comfortable doing that. And 55% were not comfortable. So as you predicted, Eric, there is a discrepancy or a conflict, a difference of a comfort level based on families and staff. That really isn't that isn't surprising. When we think about, as a family member, I have to weigh, as a parent, I have to weigh um, my need to have some consistency and supervision and support in my family. And I also know how my children personally responded to remote learning and whether I'm willing to take the risks. Uh, you know, however you feel about the virus and differing opinions, consistently students are at low risk. The people delivering the instruction, the people driving our buses, the people working in our schools fall into a higher risk category, whether they have an underlying.
Amy, we lost you, I think.
We lost you, Amy, if you're there.
Well, I'll fill in the blank space
No
of
one
noise
can hear.
until Amy comes back.
Am I back?
Oh,
All right,
perfect.
I'm back. Okay, so the by, I don't know when you lost me, but by simple nature of the data that are, I as a parent might be more comfortable because my children in general, unless they have an underlying condition or they're our most vulnerable youth, are at lower risk. But the people working in our schools, just by simple nature of being of older than children, are at a higher risk, much less whether they have an underlying condition personally or in their home. So they share those concerns. Um, about how will they be protected. So it's not the conflict in that data is not concerning. We I am concerned about how to protect the adults that work in our schools, and I'm conflicted about that. But the underlying message here is our job is to provide for the education of students, and I struggle with that. I don't struggle with the fact that our primary purpose is serving students, but the idea of safety of our adults is a real thing. So what are the procedures, what are the protocols, what are the things that we can put into place to help ensure our staff is safe? Also understanding that staff has the ability, our rights, or s- procedures or protocols, allowances to have doctor's notes and to have reasons to not be able to provide in-person instruction, and could be perhaps assigned to our remote learning, to allay some of those concerns. But it is a very real conflict and concern at a national level. You can read about that in the news, and I struggle with that as the employer of people who serve our children. But the truth of the matter is our primary purpose is to provide for the education of students. That would be my comment on that. My personal commentary on that, Eric.
Well, and I just want to chime in again so that anybody listening and then any feedback that gets spread through the community, there's an obvious conflict between the people who are being asked to put themselves at risk and the people who are asking those people to put themselves at risk. And we need to make sure that we aggressively support our teachers and their
Yes.
desire to be safe and healthy.
Yes. It's a very real concern.
Yeah, maybe this is a question for John again, I don't know, but when we think about kind of the physical safety strategies, I know some places are looking at shielding teachers if they're at a desk or whatever. I mean, we've been doing that in the retail environment since almost this thing began. Are there things like that we're considering to help? And I know it doesn't work at every grade level, but to physically separate the teacher from the class?
Yeah, I mean that's a recommendation from Hamilton County Public Health. There's a couple of implications to that. There is a cost of purchasing and installing that, and because that has been um, what's been happening at the retail and business level for since the beginning of the pandemic, access to plexiglass access to those items is real. It's not readily available in a timely fashion. Some suggestions and some potential options might be shower curtains, but again, how to install those and making sure that those things are in place. Yes, those are being considered and being discussed. Can I speak with great certainty that we could provide that? But that is absolutely something that we want to do to support our staff, is consider those items and ideas like that.
Thank you.
Are we good with 5-day a week? I mean, not good with it. Are you comfortable with understanding it?
So if a staff member were to contract COVID and they were an in-person teacher, should I assume that they are then using sick leave for the minimum 14 days, or?
Mr. Ogden? I'll let Chuck address that.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Nice to be on the Zoom. Right now, per the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, there would be automatically they are granted 14 days of leave, which does not, Ms. Washburn, as you know, which does not impact any type of sick days or things of that nature. But there are also certain counties are also looking at, they're debating right now, are educators essential personnel, which falls under a different classification. And not to keep bringing it up, but we're hoping to get some clarification on that moving forward over, I think, by the end of this week. But if you're essential personnel, that kind of changes a bit in regards to whether they have to quarantine for 14 days or whether you can get 2 positive tests back in a 24-hour period and then monitor your temperature a couple times a day. That is a very loaded question, but as of right now, it would be the 14-day quarantine and following that federal legislation.
Thank you.
Okay, so now that we're going to call scenario 2 for consistency purposes, but shall herefore be referred to as blended model. Scenario 2, just for clarity, but that is a blended at a half capacity model. And so this one is for lack of a better term, it's messy. There's a lot of moving parts in this one, and a lot of different parts to play out. A lot of moving parts in this one. If you thought there were a lot of moving parts in scenario 1 and 5-day, this one is heavy. So bear with me and hear what a blended model looks like. So again, before I start into this, I want to reiterate, we are looking tonight to decide whether we are going to offer any in-person learning. It's not let's do 5-day a week or this blended model. It's are we going to look at 5-day a week and do all of the work to address those questions and suggestions and clarifications that you brought up, including the myriad of ones that our families and our staff have brought up, or are we going to go after the clarifications and protocols and systems around this model? So I just want to be clear about, it's not both, it's either or in the event we're choosing to offer an in-person model. So the blended scenario tries to attack a plan that looks at half capacity. So there are a couple of scenarios that the staff has worked through. Um, One, we're going to call it scenario 2A for just clarity and consistency and how we might refer to it for the purposes of our discussion. And that would put all students in person 2 days and remote 3 days. I think in our original survey, we talked about a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday model with Friday off, but we got lots of feedback that said people would prefer the Wednesday off and we could do the cleaning. The details of that exist. I'm not presenting them tonight necessarily. If you have specifics, Andrea can answer them. But the notion there is that it's 2 days on, 3 days remote, so that one day there's for cleaning going on in the buildings. And then 2B puts pre-K through 4 at an AM PM scenario where half the students are coming in the morning, half the students are coming in the afternoon, and then grades 5 through 12 go to that 2 day on, 3 day off model. So those are the two presented potential options, or the two options for a blended model. Again, we would be putting in all the proper health and safety precautions. In this case, facial coverings would be required for staff, as that's the rule from our state agency. But students would be required to wear facial coverings only when they couldn't be distanced 6 feet apart. So because we're half capacity, we would be looking at designing the classroom so that currently what we're sitting at here in our board meeting is we are all 6 feet apart. That is why we are not wearing masks, because we are all spread about. I'm using my hands as if you can see me. I know you can only see my screen. We are spread about 6 feet apart, so we're not wearing masks. But if we were to get together to have a more close-knit conversation, we would all be wearing our masks. Think of that for the classroom. Is this better? Thank you for that. The proper cleaning protocols would be in place. Again, we would have no full day kindergarten. Again, the high school schedule is backed up 30 minutes. You would again choose that per semester so that we can staff and plan for that. And again, we would transition to full remote if we were required. So that's the general overview of scenario 2, or the blended half capacity model, if that's something that we wish to pursue.
Amy, the point of this is what, that we reduce exposure by 60% or 65% or something like that. And
That's a great segue, Mr. Doherty. What would the impact be on students and staff? It would reduce the risk of exposure for students and staff. Did you lose me? Oh, I thought I was getting a signal. I thought I was getting a signal from a team member that I was gone again. So the impact on students here is that it would somewhat reduce the risk of exposure by allowing more distancing. But also it would limit the ability to meet academic and social emotional goals. So if you think about this as, we're gonna try to meet in the middle and do both things kind of well. So it reduces risks. It does not eliminate risk. We're still gonna have some of the questions you asked. We're still gonna have to have students in the hallways. We're still gonna have those concerns. But as far as a classroom risk, it would reduce that capacity, not eliminate, but reduce, to answer your question. Yes.
Just to clarify that, Amy, because I think you said distancing, and is there a density change here where we have fewer students in a classroom, or are we just having everybody together, 2 days versus 5 days?
No, because it's half capacity, so we would only have half capacity at any time. So if you were AM PM, we would put half the students in the AM, half the students in the PM, or with the older grades, we would do 2 days on, 2 days off. So Amy's coming on Monday, Tuesday, and Kevin is coming on Thursday, Friday, so that we're not in the building. So we're creating cohorts, half of the student population in attendance at one time.
Okay. Okay.
So that's the impact on students, which is sort of not doing anything well, but trying to meet in the middle, and there's some compromises there that we're trying to address all the needs in some capacity. That's the impact there. Impact on families, again, supervision and support for the impact on supervision of support of students and the impact on work schedules. In this particular case, if I might summarize. I am speculating. This is Amy's observation of reading through lots of parent feedback. The impact on families of a split blended schedule seems to be harder or of greater challenge to families than simply going fully remote. At least in a fully remote, I can make a plan that's consistent for every day. There is great concern based anecdotally on if I were to try to figure out what does AM PM look like, what does a Monday, Tuesday / Thursday, Friday look like. We can and have routed and have done the work to make sure that family units can be on the same schedule, but that still does not address my need as a working parent to figure out what to do on those other 3 days when my student is not here. So that impact is pretty significant on families. Again, there are costs associated with that, and there is feedback data. The family data is clear. That there's no clear preference on this from either the parents or the students. I'm sorry, the parents or the staff, but again, let me clarify some of that. The question was, are you comfortable? The answer was, many people answered it as, do you like it? So there are people who said I was not comfortable with the blended, and their comment about was that I don't even entertain that. I will only listen to 5 day a week. There was other people saying I'm concerned. I hear your effort, but I'm still not convinced that you can keep. I'm still concerned about the risk, or I'm concerned about the social emotional health or academic needs of my students. So the answers to that were across the board with sort of no clear commitment to that. And I would attribute that to, we're not really doing, in a blended model, we're not really doing anything well. And I think that's sort of what the data represents in that particular case. But I'm speculating, and I'm simply utilizing what the words that people have gifted us with to help us understand their preference. So that's sort of the general overview on that. So I'll open that back up to questions and clarifications from the board to the team.
Well, I don't mind leading. I think we all see the challenges in that type of model. And the real question that we have to ask ourselves is, will we be more successful in a blended model, keeping children in school for a longer percentage of time than if we attempt to go to a 5 day a week model? And I think there's some questions that we need to have answered before we can decide that. The biggest one is, is there going to be a significant reduction in exposure by doing so? And I think that's arguable, and I think it's relatively unable to be known by us. I'm interested in anybody else's thoughts, but if you think about it as, if we pick a blended model, will we be able to keep children in school more effectively than if we pick a non-blended model where you're in school 5 days a week?
I'm open to other people's thoughts about that, but I would say two things. One, I have great concern. We have concern about one of the reasons that we might have to go to remote is the ability to staff. If let's say we've determined these are the people who can't come and be at work. That's fine. We solve that problem. But now I got sick or you got sick, and then staffing and the ability to deliver instruction becomes a problem. Getting substitutes is a problem on a normal circumstance. I'm not really sure how you get substitutes. Hey, we've had a COVID outbreak. Would you like to come and substitute? That's not super appealing. So I am concerned about staffing in general. Is it possible that by going blended, the spread and the risk of spread is reduced and could extend that time? Hypothetically, like maybe that's possible, but we have no way of knowing that. The truth of the matter is the more likely scenario about closure is going to come from a government agency determining that there is a local spread of the virus and we would have to close. Staffing concerns will always be there. I'm not certain that we should make a decision about whether a blended model reduces or extends, to your point, of whether that would keep us in person longer or not. It's certainly something to think about, but I don't know that.
Let me interrupt you again, Amy, then. So what are the positives of a blended model?
The positives of a blended model would be that we are providing an opportunity for some face-to-face, and we are able to provide for 6 feet distancing, which we are not able to provide for in a 5-day-a-week model. We can distance the adults 6 feet, and we can look at American Academy of Pediatrics and look at 3 feet and work on 3 feet for students, but we can't provide that in 5-day-a-week. So this does allow for the potential for reducing the risk of exposure based on the ability to distance humans in our building. And it does provide for some additional time to clean and sanitize. It does provide for additional layers of sanitation, while still giving the opportunity to have some face-to-face. So it's a bit of a compromise on both sides would be the why. I even hesitate to call that a positive because that's a stretch, but would be why we explored this model.
Amy,
Could I just ask a
really-
question?
Sorry, was that Kathy?
Yes, I
Yeah,
was
go
just
ahead,
going to ask
Kathy,
a
I'll
quick question related to that. And that was, I just want to make sure I'm understanding that the blended model would give us the positive of potential distancing, but still all students are going to be, the same number of students are going to be exposed to the same number of staff. It's just fewer days per week. In other words, we are not keeping, we're keeping people in groups, but we're still having teachers with students, and then teachers are going to be with the B group of students the other 2 days of the week. So everybody's going to still be exposed, just like in the 5-day model. It's just that there's more chance for them to be distanced more than in the 5-day model. Is that correct?
Yes.
Amy and Eric, Eric, I appreciate you challenging me on my thinking here, but I've been listening carefully and thinking to myself, versus what I have learned over the last few months, what I've read, what I've studied, et cetera. And this is a super uncomfortable set of choices in front of us. So, preface it by saying there's no perfect answer to this, right? But the data tells us that young people's ability to deal with this is significantly better than older people's ability. And we know from a child development perspective that getting back into the classroom is a far more positive experience than trying to do learning remotely. So I try to think about, what does that leave you with? You want students back in the classroom as much as you can, but the statistically far more at risk population is the teacher in the front of the room or other staff around the building. So can you have a focus on protecting the teachers and the staff and bias the strategy in that direction? Because, God forbid a child gets sick and et cetera. And I'll hate me saying what I'm saying because I'm just talking about statistics right now. The chances of a young person are far, far different than an older person. So can we bias the strategy heavily towards protecting the staff?
I mean, that
Well-
would be the purpose of this conversation of, are we going to offer an in-person model, and which in-person model would we offer? How do you proceed?
Yeah, I think I'm saying something a
Is
little
that conversation?
Yeah, I think I'm saying something a little different. My bias, what I'm saying is if your strategy was really built around protecting staff, heavily built around protecting the staff because they're far more at risk. Are there things that you might do that, takes the exposure risk for them significantly down? And the simple thing is, the thing that I mentioned before, but that's just an example. Are there other strategies that could be employed to protect the staff? Because the better scenario for the students is kind of the 5-day thing.
Kevin, I'll pitch in, and I think I need to pitch in by saying, as I've listened to this conversation, I've tried to decide, is this Sophie's choice or is this King Solomon dividing the baby in half? I mean, there's no good or right answer. There's no obvious pathway forward. We know that having children try to learn remotely has tremendous negatives. We know that having lots of kids in small classrooms all day promotes the spread of disease. There's no way around the fact of either of those two things. But we also know, and this now is my opinion, obviously we're having a conversation, if in the group of families who has selected that we would like to send our children to school 5 days a week, they have also selected for the risk of disease spread more than the group of people who has said, I would like an online learning academy. So we have to know that they've made the choice, that they realize that there's a higher risk if they send their children to school 5 days a week. Okay, we can accept that, and we realize that the people have said we're okay with this risk. We've now exposed our teachers who aren't necessarily okay with that risk to an increased risk. We're asking you to be in school 5 days a week with a room full of students who probably, based on what we think we know, aren't super at risk for getting horribly sick themselves, or maybe necessarily even transmitting it back to their families at home. but the teachers are certainly at more risk. So you hit the nail on the head. If we go to a 5-day-a-week model, we have to be very clear that we support the teachers in the ways that we can to minimize their risk as much as we possibly can. And I don't mean to rush our conversation forward, and I think we're getting close to the end of Amy's presentation, but that's really the conundrum that we face.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tell us the next slide, Amy.
Well, I mean, it quantifies exactly what both you and what the board members are thinking, and what both you and Kevin have said is, it's a mixed bag. 47% are comfortable with a blended model. For to your point of you know Sophie's choice, it's not like 100% of our staff said, yes, that's the perfect model. They're still concerned about exposure, even at half capacity. If the primary focus is protect staff, then we're fully remote. But you can see that was not what the staff wanted. The staff wants to educate our kids. They're very conflicted. We've purchased shields for the teachers so that they can still see the students, but they have that shielded protection. You've seen those, the face shields. To provide that barrier for teachers. There is an element. Say the words out loud. I don't. Oh, there's hand sanitizer to continue to do that. Teachers have the ability to work on staying 6 feet from their students. Is that ideal for proximity and how we build relationships with students? No, but there is an ability for them to teach from a distance within our classrooms to separate themselves. But absolutely, we have to look at what are the recommended barriers. Again, I refer back to we have our colleagues that we meet with regularly. What creative ideas does District X have? That's an awesome idea. Let's replicate that. More heads together to try to provide for the safety and protection of our students. But truthfully, the only way to provide for full safety of our employees and our students would be fully remote. Any decision that brings students into the building will place adults at higher risk because they fall into a higher risk category. So what are the ways that we can do to protect our staff has to be a priority.
Well, and Amy, I can't agree with you more. I have one more concern, because I feel pretty comfortable that I see a good way forward for us, at least initially. But my biggest concern, and what everybody has to hear, is the wild card of how much of this is out of our control. And I'm going to throw this at you, knowing that you don't have an answer. If Hamilton County moves to a purple status, and they decide that this is equivalent to, we recommend that everybody stays at home, does that mean that we can't have open schools?
Right.
We're half in Hamilton County and half in Claremont County. I mean, we're not the same as downtown Cincinnati or Three Rivers or Indian Hill or Sycamore.
Right.
Is the county planning to tell everybody, schools, that they have to shut down if there's a certain number of cases? And I know that we don't know the answer to that.
What a great question. That is a question that the superintendents have posed to Hamilton County about, are you willing to what is your guidance in that? And at this particular moment, they are, I'm not going to say they're unwilling to make that is under advisement. So we're waiting for that direction. We have to defer to Hamilton County if they provide guidance. But let me give you another example because you brought it up. A neighboring school district is trying to define their own way to look at their community spread or their issue in their own locality. So a school district in our area in Hamilton County has utilized the zip code spread. So my zip code has 6 and your zip code has 12. And they've used that to determine a metric as that relates to Hamilton County in general and the state to determine here is our school district X, here is our threshold for when we're saying our community spread is too great, we're going to close down. How do we look at that? So we can look at our Hamilton County data in that way, but Claremont County does not and will not be producing zip code level data. So that opportunity to consider our local spread is not available to us because Claremont County will not be producing zip code level data. So is there another way to do that? Maybe, but by replicating, that when I say we're looking at what other school districts are doing, like that's a great idea. How might we do that? We run into that issue because we do run into school districts. But you're exactly right. How might we look at what's our specific situation here in the Loveland City School District, because we are not Hamilton County, we are not Claremont County, we are Loveland, and how might we do that? An example is look at zip codes. We are precluded from doing that because of our current situation. That does not mean there's not another way to do that. Tomorrow as we look through that, the zip code data investigation was yesterday. So, hopefully there, we could come up with another one to try and address what you're saying, what you're asking. Does that start to get to how we're thinking about that, Eric?
No, exactly. I think we're in a dangerous position because we're in the far northeast corner of Hamilton County, yet we are painted in the Hamilton County Public Health District.
And a lot of times people are like, well, Kings is doing this. Well, Kings is in Warren County, so they work with a different public health system. What's Milford doing? Well, they're fully Claremont County. So, sometimes our neighbors don't have, in this particular case, they have a different set of guidance or it's not guidance like written guidance, but as I meet with Hamilton County weekly, different set of interpretation of how we do business, we have to lean towards Hamilton. Enough of that?
I think so.
Okay. So, now we need to just sort of summarize and hear people's thoughts. When I think about, what is my role as a superintendent? I'm not the HR director. I'm not the curriculum director. I'm not the transportation director. So my job is to empower those people to do the work, and then my job is to synthesize that back. So if you think about, what do I have to represent? In the orange, I have to think about what's my recommendation around the impact on students. And if I'm talking about only students, I'm thinking we've got to have them here. Like students are about educating students and meeting their needs. If I'm only in the orange and that's my only thought, then that's where I have to be. But what about their safety? Because that also was a concern. That dark gray areas, I also have to consider what's our impact on families. How are we serving the needs of our families? What's their feedback on how are they going to continue to provide for their students, and what's the impact on our decisions on family? On a very micro level, it's making decisions about school delays. It would be easier for families if we would call off school the night before. I understand that, but that does not meet the needs of making sure that we can provide for an education. I have to weigh those things when we make those decisions on a very small scale. And then I also have to wear my financial hat, and what are the costs associated with these? Is anything possible if we had unlimited staff and unlimited funds? Certainly we could improve things, but we have I have to wear my fiscal hat around those decisions. So when I take all of those things into consideration, I think the next slide is, these are some examples of what are the impacts that feed into looking at that. So when I make recommendations or when I have a thought process, I'm wearing all of those hats. So I encourage you to think about all of those hats, and what are your thoughts about if I were to ask your question on an individual level, like, should we offer an in-person model, yes or no? And if so, is it full in person or is it blended? What are your thoughts about those things?
Big question.
Amy, if I could go first, maybe if the other board members would let me, I just want to resume. Recently we've gotten about 50 to 60 emails. Most of them are concerning the financial issues that we'll be dealing with in a little while. But we did receive over a dozen emails to the board concerning opening schools. And we got the same kind of data. It's very small group of people, but we got about 5 people who said they want the 5-day. We got about 3 people who said they wanted the blended choice. And we got a couple of people who said, don't open the schools. And then we got a few other folks who talked about, make sure you have the PPE and make sure you have the safety. And so, I could give you some ideas based on those emails, or I could give you the ideas of what I'm thinking. But before I would give you my thoughts, I would kind of like to hear what the administration take on this is. Are you ready to have a recommendation? And do you want to share that before you hear from the other board members, or do you want to hear all of the board members before you share your recommendation?
I think I would really like to hear what your individual thoughts on that are. In our own isolated world, we've talked ourselves in and out of every scenario over the course of the last 3 weeks. I wish that I could say, you know what, I got a recommendation and I think this is the best case scenario. We've talked ourselves in and out of several tonight. So, I guess I'd like to, based on our presentation, because you haven't been involved in all of our conversations, I'd be really interested, and you all have different levels of opinion and expertise. I'd be interested to think about, I would be interested to hear about what you had to say. Ultimately, I do understand that the school district will make a recommendation, but I'd really want to hear what you're thinking about before I would make that.
Yes, hearing your presentation, listening to the other board members and their questions and input, my gut reaction, and that may change after listening to Kevin, Eric, Michelle, Kathy, and so on, but I would say, and from what I've read, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong here, the American Academy of Pediatrics is really heavily leaning towards kids should be in school for that social and emotional piece. In my opinion, I think that's what's best. The in-person learning with the then on virtual academy or whatever it was that you called it, the online option. I think that offers the families the choice. I do have the sympathy and concern though for the staff. So I know I'm not like committing here and giving you a definitive answer, but
That's
I'm
fine.
heavily leaning towards the in-person with online option.
And what about blended versus 5-day a week, Eileen?
Yeah, the 5-day a week. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. I just needed that clarification. I
Yeah, I
appreciate your,
apologize.
nope, I appreciate your willingness to say those things, and again, could not underscore enough our concern for protecting everyone. Other board members, I am going to ask all of you. So silence, I'm going to push on you. Silence is not going to be, you're going to have to say, I'm going to choose to abstain from that. So that conversation, but I am going to ask to hear from all of you.
Nobody's accused me yet of being silent, so I'll go ahead. And first, I have a quick question for you. And the way the agenda is set up, we're going to be voting on a motion that refers to a plans and options program. I'm now assuming that the presentation isn't the plan. Am I correct in that assumption?
What you would be, the resolution would be that you are going to support an in-person model or not an in-person model. And if the resolution is to support an in-person model, it would be 5-day a week or blended. You will not be supporting the details of a plan. We have lots of work to do with the details of a plan. You're simply saying that as a board, you are behind the administrative decision to provide in-person 5-day a week, fully remote, or in-person blended.
Yeah. Okay. So where I would be on this, and you're gonna love me for this, but if I was to look at what you've given us tonight in the presentation, I'm kind of a 1A, which is, 1, if I understand it right, says it's 5-day, but we have a remote learning option for those families that select that, and we also have it in our hip pocket if, God forbid, we have to shut the schools down, or we have to refer a student or groups of students to online for quarantine purposes or what have you. That's my understanding of kind of 1.
Yes.
1A to me, says that 1 is inadequate on the subject of staff protection. And I would be in the camp of asking you to develop very specific, focused, highest impact that we can reasonably come up with strategies to protect the staff. And in so doing, we deal with both of the practical issues in front of us, the need for an in-classroom experience for our students, and the moral obligation that we have to our staff, despite, we've all read feedback from staff members and from the public in general, and it's quite admirable. You have teachers that are saying, I'm afraid, but I'll take the risk and I'll do what needs to be done. And I think, we in turn have an obligation back to those employees who serve the district and serve our kids to do everything that we can to protect them in the execution of our joint mission of, putting our children through the best educational experience that we reasonably can. And to me, that suggests that there is the potential to compromise on the student experience. I can't think of all the ways that might happen, but if we stopped moving students from classroom to classroom, and that diminishes a bit the educational experience for this awful year, difficult year in front of us, that might be a reasonable price to pay if it in fact helped us protect the staff further. Now, I'm not smart enough to think about all the strategies that might come up to do what I just said, but that would be the direction that I would be giving you.
I would say that's not a 1A. I would say that is a 1. Yes, 100%. We agree with you. The protection of our staff, if we're going to offer an in-person model, is a high priority for us. That we would agree with that expectation on the administrative team.
Well, I'll follow Kevin that I'm always happy to talk. Michelle or Kathy, would either one of you like to go ahead first, or I'm happy to go next, whatever works best for you.
It's all right with me, Eric, if you go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Sounds good. Amy, I think I have one other question, just really for clarification purposes. And that question is, if we are going back to a full capacity model, are there issues with busing and how does that look? And then B, are we expecting our children to wear masks during the entire school day? Because I understand that in the blended model where there could be 6 feet of distance, then not necessarily would they have to wear masks. But in a model which we have full capacity and children are only 3 feet apart, we should make very clear to everybody that our expectation is that these children will have to wear masks during the school day. Am I understanding that correctly?
You are understanding that correctly. The caveat I would add to that is should a government agency require that we're not in school? The question we have to Hamilton County Public Health right now is, as an essential function, the mandatory mask for Hamilton County, does that apply to students? Does that apply to the business of government to do that? That's a clarification we're seeking currently from Hamilton County. So that's a caveat on top of our policy that we'll talk about when we talk about the policy. But yes, that is to be very clear. If we are here 5 days a week, students will be expected to wear masks. There are other colleagues in other districts talking about mask breaks and how do we make sure that kids have an opportunity to take those off. That would have to be part of our procedures to build that into the day, just like washing our hands.
Well, and I think that was important for me to say and for you to respond to, because if people are deciding we would like to send our children to school full time, they also have to be acknowledging that no matter what their personal decision is or their personal belief, that your child wearing a mask in class is important, necessary, and expected.
And will be ultimately board policy. Yes.
Right. And so to go back, for all the reasons that we've talked about already, I feel that it's very important to at least try to get our children into schools in person for as long as possible. I have concerns about our obligation to follow the policies put forth by the Hamilton County Health Department, because I'm not sure that the decisions made in downtown Cincinnati for the best health and safety of that community is necessarily the same decision that is made for us. But honestly, we don't have a lot of control over that. So much as we've discussed already, and you've probably already heard from me, I would absolutely support version 1, going to school full time, 5 days a week, even with the fact that children will be closer than we would like them to be, but also with the caveat that we definitely offer an online academy for the children whose families cannot tolerate the risk of them being in person, and for the teachers who can't tolerate the risk of being in person. And much like you and Kevin have already discussed, I need to make sure that I'm very clear to our teacher population that your health and safety is very important to us.
Thank you.
Okay, I can go next if that's okay with you, Dr. Loren.
That's fine, Michelle. That's fine.
Okay, I am leaning heavily towards the full capacity going 5 days. My concern is more for the younger ones being in the classroom. I have to hear more about what our protocols are going to be for specials and recess and lunch. The younger ones sitting in the same room and not or running around and getting that concerns me quite a bit. And then on top of having to wear the mask the entire time that they're there, except for when they're putting food in their mouth, all necessary things, but that's where I'm leaning. I'm just very concerned about their inability or to be able to
Sure. the realities of that,
Right.
knowing that you have a little one in your house and you can imagine how that plays out. I hear you.
Is it my turn?
Yeah, those were my concerns. I mean, I'm all in for one except for those are my concerns.
Thank you, Michelle.
The benefit of going last is you can just say everything everybody else said. But I do have a couple of things to add. Although maybe that's just Amy not sharing her screen anymore. My screen changed.
I was looking at how to not share my screen, but I did not realize that was distracting. I apologize.
No, that's
I will
okay.
leave it up.
It just said your meeting will start in a few minutes, and I thought, uh-oh, did they lose me?
No.
First of all, if I wanted everyone to be safe from the virus, then I would say nobody should go back to school yet. That's just, that's the most safe. But having taught both in person and online, I do believe that even with quality online education, there are things that are missing. In other words, I taught language online, and I don't believe that you can teach language online as well as you can having person-to-person communication. Part of the reason to teach language is so that people can talk to each other. And so there are many aspects of education that I don't believe are fully handled online. We're getting there with Zoom meetings. We're getting there with people being able to participate in that way. But particularly for our younger students, I don't think we're giving them what they need in school by being fully online. I don't think we know enough. We're not getting enough guidance. I don't think we're getting enough from the data. I hate this kind of thing where we have data that says it's only this many people who will get sick and only this many people who will die. And obviously in Loveland, we don't want anyone to get sick, and we certainly don't want anyone to die. So all of those things being said, I do tend to agree. I don't see enough difference between a 5-day plan to go back to school and a blended plan to go back to school that says to me clearly it's much, much safer if we do a blended. I think that's much, much more disruptive to families as well as to teachers. So I sort of agree with everything that's been said, that it sounds like a 5-day with an online option, with the clear understanding that we're not making heroes out of our teachers and our staff, because when you make somebody a hero, that means they're going to take care of you. You're not going to take care of them. And just as everybody said, we're going to take care of our teachers and our staff, our bus drivers, our administrative assistants who greet the kids as they come into school, all of those people. And so if we can do that, then I would be for the 5-day-a-week plan with the online option. You're muted, Amy.
You're muted, yeah.
I greatly appreciate your willingness to share your synopsis and your concerns. I think that's just important to understand for staff, for community listening, that there is no easy answer, and the conflict or the struggle that the board members have just shared, I will say that has been the ongoing conversation internally with administrative staff. There is at no point we're like, yes, that's the right answer. It's simply weighing, all of those hats. What is the best recommendation? So it does sound to me, based on the summary of our conversation and based on the administrative recommendation that I'm bringing forward, that the Loveland City Schools would be offering an in-person model when allowable based on the data. And that in-person model would look like a 5-day-a-week model, full capacity, while we strive to seek any ways that we can to protect the adults that are working here. The online academy will be available to parents who are uncomfortable with our 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 processes to bring students back 5 days a week. So when we talk about the recommendation in the resolution, Appendix A, that doesn't exist, would be looking at in the presentation scenario 1. So the words associated with scenario 1 would represent that resolution that you are recommending and supporting. That's the way we will proceed. Understanding that within that resolution, that is not 180 days of school. That is, we will be offering the in-person model as available and as we can based on the local spread of community spread, and as agencies would allow us to do. If we're going purple, all of those things, those procedures, those protocols, those specifics have to be worked out, but that provides the direction to the administrative team to provide those protocols and make those recommendations and utilize our experts groups to help us determine the difference between local control and the things that are that we must respond to. So the language within the resolution